All right, and welcome to our first Zoom discussion of baseball. I know that it's been a long quarantine period of time, and I wanted to bring together some minds who I really appreciate. I feel like they really know what they're talking about, and can give both differing perspectives, but great ideas and help the conversation. So first off, right, I'm Matt Kress. I'm an assistant coach at Bloomsburg University currently, graduate assistant. And I have just finished my first year of the Masters of Education program, which thankfully is over. Quarantine has been hard on that. So let's go around. So we'll go to Brandon. Go ahead, Brandon. I'll let you explain yourself, who you are, what's going on, all that.
Yeah, I'm Brandon Binder. I'm an undergraduate student at Bloomsburg University. I'm a student assistant coach on the team at Bloomsburg. So I'm really interested in baseball, love baseball. Baseball's always been a passion, and unfortunately got cut short due to the pandemic. But we're trying to get together to bring back some of that baseball knowledge. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then go ahead. We'll go Nick here.
Yeah, so I coach at the high school level in southeastern Pennsylvania. I used to catch, actually back when Matt was still pitching, I used to catch his bullpen. Now I'm a master's student at Villanova studying math and studying applied statistics. So I'm big on like the data side of baseball, but I bow down to you guys when it comes to player development.
Yeah, no, and first off, Nick catching me, man, that feels like years ago. But I really enjoy the. Go ahead.
I said that's how I met you. It was always one with two more fastballs. 30 pitches later, two more fastballs.
Yeah. That's you're not wrong on that one. But I really enjoyed when I was thinking about who I wanted to have my first conversation with. Both of you guys have like the idea of you played high school baseball, and so you have that idea of what's going on, but you're also really in tune with the conversations that we're having about statistics. Of course, Nick's going for that in his master's degree, and then Brandon and I know have had multiple conversations since we're on the same staff. So let's get right into it. The first topic that we really wanted to talk about was kind of surrounding a conversation Brandon and I had about a Zoom conference that he was in. So I'm going to kick it over to Brandon. You're going to explain kind of what you were taking away and who you were talking to over this quarantine.
Yeah. So yesterday I was in a phone conference call with Casey Dykes, the minor league hitting coach for the Trenton Thunder, the Yankees organization. And he was basically talking about the way that he goes about hitting. And I found it interesting because I'm always trying to learn more about the game of baseball. And one of the biggest points that he brought forth in that meeting is the fact of player development and communication. There's a lot of argument with old school versus new school baseball. And at Bloomsburg, we like to use a term called the middle school, which is basically a mixture of both. And he said that if you cannot communicate the data that you have for your players, then there's no point in having it. There's no point to measure everything just for the sake of measuring. The data is there simply to make your players better. And another thing that he had mentioned was that the new school is so good at getting the data. And like I said previously, the communication aspect isn't all there. And then the old school aspect, they're so good at talking and having that baseball mind that they can get points across, but they're so cookie cutter and stuck on the older points that there's not much progression going on alongside of new advancements in baseball with the data aspect. So basically, the conference call was through a baseball facility called Maple Zone Sports Institute. And there was a whole bunch of baseball minds just talking and conversing about the aspect of what he does and how he does it. So, yeah, that was basically the conversation. There's a lot of hitting involved in it, which isn't my forte. I like the pitching aspect of it, but that really struck me was the fact that if you can't communicate what you're measuring, then there's no point in using that data.
Right. And now, so it's definitely applicable for both sides of the ball, right? It's applicable for, hitting and pitching. But I'm going to kick it over to Nick really quick and see kind of your thoughts and opinions formed around this idea of, like the middle school, being able to have some of those communication aspects that people say the old school really have. Well, you personally are really interested in like the statistic sides, which a lot of people will talk about, like the new school guys. But let me get your thoughts and opinions on that one.
Yeah, no, I think it's perfect. That middle ground, I think, is what, or the middle school we're calling it, I think is what people should strive for. If you think about it, I made this comparison to you last night, Matt. Um, not not to intentionally get political, but who would make the greatest president? Someone that's hard right or someone that's hard left. And the reality is, the best president is probably somewhere right in the middle. The problem is they just would never win an election. In baseball, you don't have to win elections. You just got to be right. Um, if you're faring on the side of data, then it probably follows that you believe the more information you have, the better. Anybody that's worth their salt will tell you information and data doesn't just come in quantitative forms, it comes in qualitative forms. And a lot of those qualitative forms we can't measure as just pure scientists. We need someone that understands the game and has that baseball intuition to provide us. And if you're leaning on the side that you're completely against data, then what you're saying is you're against change and you're against information. You're against making informed decisions. If you have, if you are in that middle ground, you then have the ability to on the data or lean on your intuition or lean on a combination of the two. But if you're all, data or you're all baseball, then you're limiting yourself and you're limiting your capabilities of what you're able to do. And I think the important part of finding that middle ground is not just saying that you're there, but being in some sort of avenue that opens up the communication between the two ends of the spectrum, right? So I think what Brandon said at the start of his story was, what's the point of all this data? It's not making your players better. You can collect all the data you want to collect, but if you don't know what it means or you don't know how to use it, it's not going to do anything for you, right? I could check the weather every day in Anchorage, Alaska, but it's not going to change how I dress when I go outside. I need to check the weather where I live. If you have this data, you have to be able to know how to interpret it, how to use it. And I think to do that, you also need the side of the spectrum with baseball. In order to maximize the effectiveness of all this, you need both sides. And I think the middle ground is where that happens.
Yeah, no, and I'm very much a big fan of what Driveline does. I know Driveline Baseball is a facility out in Seattle. I've been listening to a lot of their AMA chats, and I know that they've lived on a principle of if you care for it, you should be measuring it, which is a very interesting thought process of, there are a lot of guys that are more than happy to measure everything from, we measure your time from leg lift to home, right? So my thing has continually been, in my short amount of time in baseball, if I care for it and if it is actionable data, then I can make a move on it. Then I probably should be doing everything in my power to take down that information and affect that data in either, well, hopefully a positive way, but whatever way we decide. Like if it's body weight, if you believe in body weight and you want a guy to lose 20 pounds, then half of the battle is saying, hey, you need to lose 20 pounds, but the other half of the battle is holding that person accountable to the fact that if after week 1 they've gained 15 pounds, there's a problem, right? So I think that's really interesting as well. So Brendan, what are your thoughts about just like this middle ground, this coach of somebody who understands the new school aspects but is able to communicate what these things mean, and what I like to call, quote unquote, like baseball Z. I know that you've had some interactions, and we can keep those names out of the podcast, but you can talk a little bit about just kind of what you took away from those interactions.
Yeah. So one big thing that I like is, if you have this data, right, you can tell them all about the data, but you have to also communicate how it's going to help them. Like you, on that point that you had made previously, you can say, hey, we want you to lose 20 pounds in this week, right? But if the player just says, if the player's just hearing, we want you to lose 20 pounds, personally, if that were me, I'd be like, why? If I'm throwing 90 miles an hour, right, and I'm told I want to lose 20 pounds, why? I would definitely want to hear why my coach is thinking that way. And I feel like that's one of the biggest things within communication with your players is just getting that point across of, hey, I want to help you, and this is why I'm recommending these things. Yeah, I've had the interactions with a few players at the professional level, and one interaction that I've had in particular, the player has even told me that the data analysts that he's worked with don't really help him. He says that a lot of these data analysts are those quote unquote math guys who can come to you and say, hey, you spin the ball real well. But he's like, well, okay, so then how do I take that data and become a better player? What do I do with it? Why are you telling me this? Are you telling me because you find the data interesting? Are you telling me because you want to help me? What's the point you're getting across here? So that's, to me, that's one of the most important things when it comes to communication, is pretty much just what are you going to do with the data? Why are you taking the data? And how is it going to help me?
Yeah, no, and I think, and I'll kick this question to Nick, because we're all technically coaches in our young 20s, right? So, we're still learning about some of the maybe older school ways and trying to blend it all. But my big question to Nick is, you've spent a couple years coaching at the high school level. The why that Brandon said, right? You have this idea that you think will improve the player, and how are you able to, take your very impressive ability to use statistics in player development, but communicate that why? So, talk a little bit about that. How your communication aspect is, how you've improved that, how you've developed that at this level, and what you've learned about that.
Yeah, so the statistics at the high school level are hard to convey because it's such a small sample size and it's not really well recorded. But what you can do is you can show your high school guys, you can show those younger players what's happening at the college level, what's happening at the major league level, and explain to them, look, this is what they're going for, this is what they want. If you want to play at that level, whether it's going to work here or not, you got to get used to it because that's what they want at the next level. A lot of the getting players to buy in, um, whether it's statistically based or not, really depends on, like you guys were saying, explaining to them why you're doing something. If you tell an angsty 15-year-old left-handed pitcher who throws 55 miles an hour but has a really, really good curveball, as a JV player, listen, if you want to play varsity, you got to be able to throw a faster fastball. You got to be able to increase your velocity. But he says, well, my curveball's so good. And you say, yeah, but I need you to increase your velocity. He's just going to keep coming back at you. But if you tell him it's because at the varsity level, they will sit on your curveball and adjust down to a 55-mile-an-hour fastball, it doesn't blow them away, you won't succeed, then all of a sudden you're making conversation, right? If you're making a mechanical change to a young pitcher and you say, listen, you're dropping your arm slot, you don't have a consistent arm slot coming through to the plate, it's all over the place, and it's tending you to get under, it's helping you get under the ball, over the ball, and kind of not being consistent in your delivery. And they say, okay, so what do you want me to do? And you say consistent arm slot, they're going to say, okay, but that doesn't get you anywhere. What you need to be able to do is to show them, A, how they can get a consistent arm slot, and B, why it matters, right? So when my approach when I'm working with pitchers is, if I tell them to do something, most of the time they get bored by the time I'm done talking, but I will ramble on for 5 or 6 minutes explaining why I'm asking them to do it. If I say, hey, try this, why don't you, turn your back a little bit when you lift your leg, or why don't you move over on the rubber? They're just going to think that I'm just, spitballing, throwing darts at the wall, hoping to hit something. And then you lose all credibility as a coach. I think the important part is to explain, to keep their interest and to have them buy in and to keep their credibility. And, whether that's data-based or whether that's mechanically, in any sort of persuasive argument, you have to be able to explain why things are happening.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really good point as well, that we can even go in at a different topic about recruiting, right? Recruiting is very, very based on data. Whether you want to agree with that or not, that's fine. But it's very, very, how hard do you throw? How hard do you hit? Great. If you don't hit those numbers, then usually there's some sort of classification that they'll put in. They'll say, oh, this player only throws this hard, so he's a Division III player. So, I mean, I think that that's even a good conversation to have about just kind of like the way we're using. I know that I showed you guys this tweet. There was a high Division I coach talking to a facility in the area about Rapsodo, right? Rapsodo ball flight technology that kicks back a lot of physics statistics on, spin rate, how it's moving in each way, even velocity. And I think that it's a really great opportunity for us to flip this conversation about um, you know the thought process around using rapsodometrics to define whether or not a pitch is good or bad, or whether or not this pitcher is for your level or whatnot. So I'll let Brandon talk a little bit about that, how we've kind of used rapsodo and in a broad sense to make some decisions. I think would be a great opportunity. Brandon, go ahead, take it away.
So absolutely, yeah. The one thing I've noticed with Rapsodo is I feel like Rapsodo allows people to find the diamonds in the rough. It allows you to see the metrics on a player that the naked eye wouldn't see. Yeah, you can see a guy that's gonna throw, high 90s, high 80s, whichever level they end up on. But Rapsodo allows you to see that guy who's gonna hammer curveballs in, and players just can't hit it. And I feel like the data really caters to helping those players become successful. We work with a student at Bloomsburg. Like I said, he just hammers curveballs in at an extremely high clip, and he's extremely successful. People sit the curveball, and it's still they can't hit it. So I feel like the Rapsodo allows us to build our philosophy when it comes to pitching outside of the original philosophy. Everybody's trying to throw fastballs past you. There was a lot of talk between me and you, Matt, with sinkers. Sinkers was a big revolution. I feel like a lot of people were throwing sinkers trying to get that ground ball. And in the data that we've seen, sinkers are really unsuccessful a lot of times. So the Rapsodo allows you to find that data that you're trying to tell your players. And it's also a model. It allows you to explain why you want them to do such a thing, rather than you're saying, well, I saw your curveball, I saw your slider, I saw your breaking ball do this. They'll say, okay, well, that you saw. If you're able to physically pull a player aside and say, hey, listen, here's basically a picture. Here's a picture of what's happening, and here's what I see. It will definitely help you get your point across to what you're trying to accomplish with that player.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree with that. Of course, we've had a lot of conversations on Rapsodo, but I think the big thing with Rapsodo is everyone loves to take a shot at Rapsodo and data for the simple fact that it's like, oh well, spin rate doesn't equal outs, which I think is a very valid point, right? I don't disagree with that, but I'd even go further to say that sometimes, at least with coaches, they really latch on to these like buzz flashy statistics, right? I know that we talked about exit velocity, spin rate, and I don't know why they do it. But Nick, can you go in and talk a little bit to me about just like how valid do you really think these stats are in the grand scheme of things? Do you think that they're actually doing a really great job of telling us how good a player is, how bad a player is, or if there's even some room for development?
I think it depends on what you look at and how you interpret it. If you're gonna look at put it this way, right? So let's take player development out of the situation and let's have an MVP discussion. We have one player who is hitting 350 and has hit 10 home runs with 60 RBIs on a division winning team, and we have one player who's hitting 280 with 45 home runs and 135 RBIs on a division winning team. Who's MVP? Right? And that comes down to a basic difference in philosophy of voters. Some voters might say, listen, this player did more to help his team through his production of getting on base and getting hits. And this other player, did more to help his team through his production of the long ball and driving in runs. And that's a very basic argument with very basic statistics. But I think it hopefully portrays my message in that it depends on the statistics you're looking at and what you value. So we can talk about spin rate of a fastball all we want. The fact of the matter is that if we're going to talk about spin rate on a fastball, and we're only going to talk about spin rate on a fastball because we think it's going to create swings and misses, there's data out there that says if you throw a 98 mile an hour fastball with a 2100 RPM, you're going to strike out more than twice the amount of hitters, or at least close to twice the amount of hitters, as if you're spinning the ball, over 2,500 times, but only throwing 88, 89 miles an hour. And it works the other way. There are players that have unbelievable spin rates on low velocity fastballs that are doing much better than high velocity fastballs with lower spin rates. And generally, the spin rate and the velocity kind of correlate with one another, so there's not too much of a distinction that occurs a lot. But it at the end of the day, these statistics are not evaluative statistics in that we're analyzing their performance. These statistics are evaluative statistics in that we're looking at what tools do they already have under their belt that we can maximize. So you guys are, the coaches, you guys work with pitchers every day at a much higher level than I do. If you guys tell me, listen, this guy's got a high spin rate, I can work with a guy that can spin a curveball, I can turn him into a great pitcher, then those are maybe that's the statistic you want to see. But if there's a pitching coach across town that says, I don't have much to do with spin rate, but for somebody that throws really, really hard, I can maximize their potential, then maybe that's what they want to look at. I think it all depends on the context of the situation. There are some statistics, I think, that are completely overblown and really don't matter regardless of the context. But these type of Rapsodo statistics that we're talking about are not to say, at least in my opinion, are not to say who's a better player, right? Because at the end of the day, the better player is the player that performs better, regardless of how they do it. These numbers, this data is to say, what does he have going for him? What's making him throw this kind of pitch? What's making this pitch be successful? What about this pitch isn't working? What can we change? It's not so much about performance analysis as it is, that player development side of the game that you guys deal with every day.
So Nick, you talked a little bit about like overblown statistics that you feel that maybe, I guess, people really put a lot of weight into, but you think are hogwash, for a lack of a better term. Do you want to really quick go in and tell me which one of those are, what you're thinking about those? Tell me about your thought process there.
Yeah. So again, in terms of the Rapsodo type stuff, I don't have as strong opinions about those. I'm not quite as educated on the background of all of them. And again, I think they're used for different purposes. But in terms of just like everyday baseball fan stuff, if you're going to tell me, for instance, I got an email today that told me Josh Hamilton 8 years ago was 5 for 5 on May 8th in 2012 with 4 home runs. Does that mean I'm going to bat him every May 8th for the rest of his career? No, I mean, that's silly. People want to talk about runs scored, and obviously the name of the game is scoring more runs than the other team, so that's important, but does it matter where they come from, right? So for years living in Philadelphia, all I heard was the Phillies record is unbelievable when Jimmy Rollins scores a run. Is that because it's Jimmy Rollins, or is that because it's coming from the guy that they're leading off? What's their record when they have whoever's leading off the game scoring a run? If I hit a single, Brandon, if I hit a single and you hit a ground ball and I'm out at second and you reach first base safely and then Matt comes up behind you and hits a triple and scores you get credited with a run and you didn't do a damn thing. Right? That's my run that Matt drove in. There's a lot out there that is useful, right? I'm not going to say any data is completely useless. You can find some use for any part of data, but to throw all your eggs in the basket that some of these statistics or some of these people do with statistics. On base percentage is one that is huge and has been huge for a while, but is maybe getting too much love. WAR, right? People will look at just a player's WAR and say you're better because you have a higher WAR, and that's not really how it comes. If you look into how WAR is calculated, it doesn't really at all, and if it does, fairly incorporate a player's defensive abilities. And there's a lot of and this I think stems from my final point on this is this I think stems from the fact that everybody wants to be an expert without doing the work. Everybody wants to say, I know everything. I mean, again, not to leave the context of baseball, but look at the situation we're in socially now with the pandemic. Everybody wants to be a coronavirus expert. Everybody thinks they have the answer as to what to do about the quarantine and the lockdown, reopening the economy, the flattening of the curve. Everybody's an expert. You log on to Facebook, Twitter, everybody's got an opinion, and opinions are okay. You're allowed to have an opinion because you have to start somewhere, but don't claim to be an expert and don't put your money on it if you don't understand the history and the reasoning behind it all. You know, if you don't understand where these statistics are coming from or how they're supposed to be used, maybe don't use them in an argument for or against whatever philosophy you're preaching.
I love that. That's a great quote right there. Everyone claims to be an expert, but really doesn't go into do all that extra, searching of the history and everything behind it. I think that's really great. I really want both of your opinions on this. We've talked a lot about like Rapsodo, which is ball physics, right? And I think Nick kind of alluded to it a little bit, but he said there's a big difference between looking at Rapsodo statistics and what I will call, and Nick, you can let me know if I'm wrong on this one, but like outcome-based statistics to define player development and player value. I think that's a really interesting topic that needs to go it needs to be talked about, because I feel like a lot of times, and I've seen coaches do this, they'll say like, oh, this kid throws 95 miles per hour, so I think that he's probably going to go to a high Division I school or major leagues. And you're like, well, like there's a lot more to it. Like, can he actually get people out? And I think a lot of times it's where like this new school and old school, again, mash. It's like, I agree. Like, he throws hard and that's great, but does he get people out? So I wanted to get both your opinion on kind of like the mixture, and is the middle ground like the outcome based statistics? That's a great question. Go ahead, Brandon. I'll let you go and then we'll go to Nick.
Well, one point I wanted to piggyback off of what Nick said with the statistics, that people kind of want that shiny statistic. People want the 10 WAR. People want to bat 330. But by you being, coaches get fixated on the big numbers. Coaches get fixated, especially with pitching. Personally, people get fixated with, oh, you spun the ball at 3,000 RPMs. Well, does that mean you're going to – it seems to me, especially with recruiting, that those coaches go out and they say, oh, well, I had success with this guy that's spinning the ball at 2,700, so now I'm going to go look for everybody that spins the ball at 2,700. And I feel like I had said previously, those diamonds in the rough, those players aren't the 100% key to being successful. There are so many outcomes, like you said, outcome-based statistics. It's all about the outcome and how you go about that outcome. There's no one way to go about a certain outcome. There's no, just look at it. There's in one inning of baseball, there's not one way to get 3 outs. There's multiple combinations of how to get 3 outs. You can get 3 straight outs. You can strike out 3 guys, 3 pop outs, double play. There's just so much to go about it that one specific statistic will not define how to be successful. And that is something that is really, I feel like, is really important, because people get fixated on one stat. People get fixated on, I want everybody in my lineup to be able to hit home runs. Okay? But what happens if the park plays big and the wind's blowing in? Everybody in your lineup's just going to hit long fly balls. So there needs to be that mesh of a little bit of everything. You need a speed guy that's going to get on base. You need somebody that's going to drive them in, or you need a guy that's just going to get on the mound and strike people out, or you need a guy that's going to get ground balls. Regardless, like you said, there needs to be that middle ground. You can't be stuck on one specific thing and expect it to work forever. It may work for a little bit. Like we've seen in professional baseball, there are guys that put it together for a year, and then what happens after that? They just fizzle out.
Right.
So I feel like you said, there needs to be that middle ground, and the way to get that middle ground is to, I personally, and this is something that I've been trying to do, is just get as much knowledge as you can about the stuff that you care about. That's my opinion on how to gain the middle ground. I feel like it's very important to try things before discrediting them, and that's what's going on with this new age baseball. Is a lot of people discredit stuff without seeing anything. They may see one instance of it not working, and then they say, you know what's going on there? That hasn't worked. Why am I going to do this? I've told my guys to drive the ball. I've told them to do this with their swing. I've told them to do this with their pitching. Why am I going to try something else? And that's where I feel like a lot of coaches and teams fail, is that they just get fixated on one thing. And also what Nick had said with those periods of the Phillies that were going really good, right? They were doing the same thing. They kept bringing back the same players. They were trying to bring back the same players. Baseball changes. So do teams. Teams need to change with the game, versus trying to stay the same, trying to do what has worked in the past is not always going to work.
Interesting. Yeah, no, good points. Nick, what are your thoughts on kind of this discussion we're having about maybe outcome-based statistics and such?
So I'll tell you a story. There's a guy named Clint Harding, Hartung, played back during World War II on some World War II teams. He was a soldier. Was a pitcher. Went 25-0, batted .567. The New York Giants at the time decided to throw a ton of money at him, think he could come into the bigs and do some big things. People were all over him. Expectations were high. Writers were writing about him before he even took the field. 5 years in the majors, he had a 5.02 ERA and a 238 batting average. So the first thing we got to be careful of is you were talking about outcome statistics, how people are going to transition 100-mile-an-hour fastball. You're going to go do big things in the majors. Just because you're successful here doesn't mean you're going to be successful there, right? Brandon's saying circumstances change, ballparks change, talent levels change. You have to be able to adjust. Baseball's not just about the skills, it's about the adjustments you make. Let's look at two examples. Aroldis Chapman, who threw 102 miles an hour, and they tried to make a starting pitcher, right? When he first came up, they tried to make a starting pitcher because he threw super hard. 102 miles an hour couldn't miss, right? Can't miss. You throw 102, 103 miles an hour, at the very worst, you'll be an average pitcher. They moved him to closer. Why? Because somebody took that and they said, all right, this velocity, which is at a much lower level, but similar to these Rapsodo type things we're talking about, right? It's not an outcome-based statistic, it's an evaluative statistic. That velocity works better as a closer. So you have to be able to take that information and use it to put players in the best situations as possible. Second example, Justin Verlander, right? Justin Verlander had an incredible start to his career because he threw 100 miles an hour. He would just throw past guys, throw past guys, throw past guys. Tim Lincecum was doing the same thing. Both of them kind of fell off a little bit, right? At some point when they were falling off, Tim Lincecum did not make any adjustments and continued to rely on a fastball that he no longer had. He was losing velocity and he just disappeared. Verlander, when he saw himself start to drop off, instead of continuing to rely on his fastball, went to his other pitches, right? So we can have and he went to his other pitches and is on a Hall of Fame track right now, mind you, right? We can have all of this information, but it's not a matter of you throw 100 miles an hour, you're going to be a major leaguer, or you went 25-0 with a 500 plus average in a World War II league, so that's going to transition well to the best league on the planet. It's not about you have 100 miles an hour, just ride this for the rest of your career, right? All this information should be used for maximizing the position players are in, right? We want to take Justin Verlander's 100-mile-an-hour fastball and understand that we understand velocity. We understand when you reach 35, 36, 37 years old, you might not be touching a consistent 3 digits anymore. So what can we do? What other pitches do you have? How's your curveball look? How's your slider? What can we do to mix these things up? Maybe throw less fastballs, maybe throw less pitches and prolong your career, right? We have all these questions, all these answers that we want to supply. CC Sabathia. CC Sabathia is a great regular season pitcher. Come September, October, he starts to break down. If you look at his career numbers, typically when he reaches a certain inning threshold or a certain pitch number threshold, that's the type of information as a coach I want to know. I don't care in that situation. I don't care about Sabathia's curveball spin rate, right? I already know what he is. He's a major league pitcher. I want to know what's causing him to break down. And I'm seeing this correlation between innings thrown and pitches thrown. When he starts to fall apart, in seasons where we limit those, he does better. In seasons when we don't, he does worse. How can we manage that? So these, in terms of trying to look at a statistic, Matt, like to your original question, in terms of looking at a specific value and trying to attest some sort of result from that, I think is foolish, right? Brandon's over there saying you gotta mix everything in, right? And if you want to build a great team, you probably need not just 9 home run hitters, but a home run hitter, an average hitter, a doubles hitter. You need some good defense at the hot corner. You need some solid pitching. You need a solid bullpen. You got to mix it up. Even if you scope that into the microcosm of one player, you kind of need the same idea. You can't get by on one statistic and say, oh, you're set for your life, right? You've got to be able to evaluate the whole picture and appropriately place weights on what you think is important and what's not, and that's not a general sweep of velocity is the most important stat. That's for this pitcher, velocity is the most important stat. For this pitcher, the curveball is the pitch we care most about. about for this pitcher, for this team. And I think, again, that's what a lot of people aren't doing. They want to just have one answer. They want to have one philosophy that they can use over and over and over again because it's easy. You're a coach. You get somebody in here. You know something works. That's what you're going to teach to everybody. You don't want to take the time to get to know each pitcher. You don't want to take the time to get to know their repertoire, their skills, their data, their stats. You have a philosophy, and if they don't fit it, see you later. You're not for this team. The fact is, if you're using this data right, it's not about fitting you to this team. It's about fitting my team to what you have.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I've always felt that, having data on, since we're all talking pitching here, but on players, but pitching specifically, really gives you a full perspective of what makes them them. Right. We're not bringing somebody in and saying, okay, you've thrown two seams for your whole entire life. But, if you actually go on Baseball Savant, which we will talk about, I love me some Baseball Savant. But if you go on Baseball Savant, you look at how hard the two seams are being hit in the major leagues, they're being hit really, really hard. So scrap it. We're going to do something else. But you can't live by those principles. Like you said, you can't be a one-trick pony. You got to have a full plethora of an idea of what's going on. And that's something that I personally have pushed an initiative, and this actually came through, what's his name? It was an Ole Miss pitcher who trained at DriveOn. He posted this charting sheet that he used in his high school baseball season. And so I looked at it and I was like, oh my God, that's really smart. I think that you could really use this to say, okay, great. This is what's happening with these pitches, so on and so forth. And I took it and I completely tweaked it. Like I figured out what I wanted to get out of these statistics and what out of the sheet. And I made it my charting sheet, right? And we used it in our short amount of time at Bloomsburg. And I said this to Brandon, and I said this to our coach, Coach Collins, and all the players, but it's like, I want a lot of data points on it. You don't have to look at them. I really don't care if you look at them. Hell, I mean, if I'm the only one who looks at them and I will, make an informed decision on it, great. But having all this data puts you, the player, in the most advantageous position where we can really show off your strengths and make you the best player that you possibly can be. Which I think that whole entire idea of just charting your games, having actionable data from your games, though it could be seen as in a way outcome data and just be like, oh, well, they had 3 home runs and 4 hits hit off of you. That's great. But like there can be actually a lot more derived if you're asking the correct questions while you're charting. Nick, do you want to actually comment on that one?
I like that. You got to ask the right questions, right? Like, you can have all the data. This comes back to my point. You can have all the data you want, but if you don't know what to do with it, it's useless.
Yep. No,
I know. Questions, you can draw conclusions from anything.
Yep. And I really enjoy that. So, I mean, I think to wrap up our conversation here, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about, I know Brandon and I know I've started to talk to Nick about, but Baseball Savant, right? Using Brooks Baseball Savant, just to get a better picture of what's going on. And I know I'm going to ask Brandon this, and then I want Nick to actually kind of talk about, he sent me one of his papers for his final statistics class of the year, and I want you to go into that. But for Brandon, tell me a little bit about just how you're using Baseball Savant to kind of, educate yourself on what's going on in the major leagues, and maybe some conclusions that that are coming off of this.
Definitely. So I feel like these tools actually right now, the technological age that we're in with baseball is personally one of my favorite. Originally, when I had first started looking at statistics, I was like, well, why are we doing this? Why are we just trying to measure everything? Why are we trying to measure like a 5-star catch? Well, who's quantifying a 5-star catch? And then once using these tools, Baseball Savant, Brooks Baseball, and tools along the FanGraphs, tools along those lines, it's just you can quantify why players are being successful. You can quantify what they're doing right and what some players are doing wrong. If I take a look at pitcher A and he throws a 2-seamer, I can go on there, sort by his 2-seam, and see how hard is it getting hit, where's he locating it, where's he throwing it, and stuff along those lines. It really allows you to see what players are doing good and what their strengths are. And I feel like by looking at what Baseball Savant tracks, It helps us as coaches. It opens our eyes as coaches to what we could look for, and then I take a lot of things that I like to do. I like to take Baseball Savant and then try to find even more, in my opinion, cooler stats, stuff that really gets my mind going along players' performance, because I want to take a lot of things that can quantify and how I can tell the players what's basically how baseball is advancing today. It really allows me to see that, and I feel like that's one of the biggest points that I've taken from those websites is how baseball is able to advance today and what players are changing, what players are doing differently, what players are doing to be successful, what they are doing that maybe hinders them a little bit. And I like to do scenarios in my mind of if I were player A's pitching coach, how would I help them? And that really helps me a lot. What would I change about them? What would I tell them? And so that's one of the biggest things that I've taken from it.
Yeah, no, and I think that push forward of the Pitch FX era is what they like to call it, really allows us to pick up on a lot of like breadcrumbs of like, hey, what's going on? What is this team that's winning a lot of games doing? Why are they doing this? What are the outcomes of it? But I digress. So we'll go into Nick. I want Nick to really quick kind of give us a little view into what he's been researching during this this quiet time for us playing baseball and coaching baseball. And then, of course, your final statistics paper, which you sent to me. And I'm not going to lie, was a little over my head, but I did enjoy the conclusions. I'd love for you to talk on that a little bit as well.
Yeah, so run expectancy is something that I've had interest in a long or for a long time. Run expectancy, runs created, linear weights. So Matt, I know you love WOBA. Brandon, I don't know if you're a big WOBA guy. WOBA is all based on linear weights, and linear weights essentially comes from this data source called a run expectancy matrix, and it's an empirical data source, which means it's not theoretical. It's based on the actual outcomes of major league events. And it says that if you are in a base out state with a runner on first and second and one out, we can expect on average X amount of runs to be scored between right now and the end of the inning, give or take, an expectation, right? And I want to leverage that into thinking about situations rather than people, as inhumane as it sounds. So I was looking at how to construct the best possible National League lineup, specifically National League, not dealing with the DH, just a very small starting point. It's based on a couple of assumptions that don't necessarily hold true, so it's not really ready to be totally absorbed by everyone yet, but it's a starting point. And I'm looking at, rather than how many times does Joey Gallo come to the plate with runners in scoring position, how many times does the sixth hitter in the lineup come to the plate with runners in scoring position? How many times does the second hitter in the lineup come to the plate with the bases empty? In what situations does a strikeout do the most damage? And by that, I mean the biggest drop in expected number of runs. Where does a walk do the most benefit? What spots in the order do those situations most occur? And looking at it, a lot of what I found kind of agrees with what baseball traditionally has been doing, and disagreeing with some of the new age stuff. And some of it's kind of just a new perspective on things. So one thing I found was that, not everybody, but it's become popular about the pitcher eighth. And every manager has a reason why. It turns the lineup over. The ninth hitter acts as the second leadoff hitter, blah, 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 blah. The fact of the matter is the lowest leverage situations happen in the ninth spot. The ninth hitter actually leads off a lot less than the eighth hitter does. Batting through simulations, batting your pitcher eighth statistically leads to less runs scored. So why do they continue to do this? The second hitter leads off the most in the order out of any position by far, followed by the fifth, both before the first. So maybe our best leadoff hitter shouldn't bat first. Maybe we should bat him second, seeing as, well, yeah, we'll forfeit that first play of the game, but over the course of the long run, he'll have more leadoff situations. It turns out the most damaging strikeout you can do is potentially second and third with one out. That will decrease your run expectancy by the largest margin. It also turns out that the sixth hitter pretty surely appears in that situation the most often. So if I have a low strikeout guy, maybe that's where I want to bat him. Limit the damage done with strikeouts. Maybe I don't want my powerful high strikeout guy batting sixth. And there's a whole lot of these results that come into effect, and it's all based on the data I chose and some assumptions that aren't necessarily true. So it's not gospel at the moment, at least, but it's this idea I'm hoping to spark people. I'm hoping to encourage people to look at baseball a little bit differently. To say, I have all of these theories and I'm going to reinvent the wheel. I'm going to be Joe Madden. I'm going to be Tony La Russa and bat my pitcher eighth because I'm Joe Madden. I'm Tony La Russa and I invented baseball. And I can throw out all these reasons that I want, but there's no data to back it up. Where is the data? And think about this differently too, in perspective of sometimes baseball just is, right? You two, I'm sure, know this. Baseball is a cruel game. You could be the best hitter on the planet and be successful 33% of the time. And in reality, it's a game of inches. If you bat 300 and you bat 280, if I bat 300 and you bat 280, I'm 20 points a better hitter, which is pretty significant in the baseball world. But that means I get one extra hit every 50 plate appearances. So it's a cruel game that we're fighting for inches and fractions here. Maybe we shouldn't be as focused on the players themselves. Again, not in terms of player development, but in terms of situational outcomes, and start to focus a little bit of energy on the actual circumstances of the game. How can we take the players we have and put their strengths and weaknesses in a situation that's best going to benefit them, rather than just expect them to do great things regardless of where we put them.
Great. Yeah, no, that's when I saw that paper, I was like, wow, he's going after it. And I love the fact that we're going after it, and I want to learn. And that brings me into my final point, and we'll wrap it up here on this one is, I'm a big fan of continuous learning, continuous improvement. I know it's something that I preach. I always say Kaizen, right? Which is a Japanese World War II term talking about continuous pursuit of improvement. So what are some things that, during this weird time that you've been trying to do to improve yourself, at least in the baseball and the coaching realm? What are some things that, you feel have been really advantageous, in your learning strategies here? So go ahead, Brandon, I'll let you go first.
Absolutely. Yeah. So as we had said previously, the internet has so much information on it. You could almost look up anything and find it on the internet. So pretty much, me personally, I'm always thinking about baseball, whether it's playing MLB The Show, whether it's watching old baseball movies, being on the baseball app on my phone. By interacting with baseball all the time, I'm always forming questions. I'm always forming questions about what if, how, why, when. So just using the internet, Baseball Savant is one instance. Helps me learn a lot. Like I said, it shows what they're doing successful, and that's a lot of the questions I have. Why is such a pitcher successful? Why is he doing this? Because you can see it a lot. You can watch a game and say, this person's throwing all these curveballs. Lance McCullers is one instance that comes to mind, threw 24 straight curveballs in an inning. And I was like, well, why is he doing that? So then I would go on Baseball Savant and I'd look at his curveball, look at the data on the curveball and say, man, this is a gross pitch. People aren't hitting this pitch. So that's one instance where I'm just trying to learn. I honestly, there's no one certain thing that I'm trying to improve right now. I'm just trying to improve my baseball knowledge. And I feel like improving my baseball knowledge, becoming a better student of the game, will help me in any baseball aspect. The more I can learn, the more I can form an opinion, the better I can form an opinion, and anything along those lines. So
that's one of my favorite right there, is just continually asking why, like a 5-year-old kid, right? Why are we doing this? Why should we be doing this? And I know that a lot of times we run into there's coaches out there that really don't love the why, like the kid asking them, why are we sitting here and throwing bullpens today? That's something that I'm continually, like you are, Brandon, asking why are we doing this? How can we be better? And I really enjoy players who are like that as well, honestly. Continuing to ask questions about the game, about pitch sequencing, you can name it, but having those questions is being a continuous learner for sure. So Nick, I'm very interested to see if I can take away some things from you and what you're learning. I know that you have a little bit of a more statistical background, so I don't know if I'm gonna be able to read that kind of literature, but I'd love to see what you've been doing to continue learning.
Yeah. So, like I said, I'm just kind of challenging thoughts. I actually stumbled across this kind of a nerd quote the other day, but it's Albert Einstein. I'm in the midst of my finals week of my master's, so I'm breaking down, and I'm sitting there and I read this quote from Albert Einstein. It says, "Do not worry about your difficulties in mathematics. I can assure you mine are still greater." Here's this man who's one of the greatest mathematicians in recent modern history, and he's telling me his problems are bigger than mine. Well, why is that? That's because even though he might know more, he's also asking more. He's not satisfied with knowing more than the next person. He wants to continually know more. What I'm trying to do with my research for myself and for anybody that wants to read it is encourage this idea of challenging thoughts, challenging beliefs, right? Always ask questions, whether it's, and this doesn't just stick to baseball, this is in life, but specifically in baseball, challenge everything. Make them prove it to you. Make them earn their salt. If you're, like you're saying, if you're sitting there and your coach says we're throwing bullpen today and you have no idea why you're doing it, or worse, he has no idea why you're doing it, then you're kind of in a rough situation. To, specifically my community is high school baseball. To high school kids, you're not annoying if you ask why every step of the way. To me, a kid that asks me why to the point where I want to punch him in the face is not a kid that I'm going to cut. That's a kid that is eager to learn about the game, and by learning about the game is going to become a better player, right? I want to challenge these thoughts. I want to look at things we've been doing in baseball for a really, really long time and ask why not, right? I so what I'm kind of doing right now with baseball not being around is I'm just reading what other people are saying, and I'm questioning, right? Questioning not because I don't believe them or I don't want to believe them, but questioning because they haven't given me a reason to believe them. And once they do, I'm in. But to coaches too, not just players, to coaches, start asking yourself why. If you've had, the one thing that irritates me beyond belief is an 80-year-old coach that's coaching the same way they coached when they started in the 60s. Like that, I can't deal with that. Not to say that there's some stuff from them that's not valuable, or your experience or your wisdom isn't valuable, but to think you get to a point where you know everything is exactly when you get to the point where you know nothing. You've got to keep asking questions, and you've got to keep challenging these thoughts, and you've got to be willing to accept the fact that you may be wrong. Everything you've based your entire baseball experience off of may be wrong, or at least may not be the only answer.
No, yeah, that's great. Even those quotes you're throwing down there, they're serious. They're really serious. To round it out, at least on my end, my recent obsession has been looking into defining ways that people learn, specifically players, and finding a way maybe to have a test or something and see how they learn so that we can communicate better with them. Because I feel like communication, at least on the coaching level, is sometimes lacking. And if I'm pursuing ways to become a better communicator and reach people where they are, then I'm really doing my job the best I possibly can. I know that I've been reading a heck of a lot of like HR books about, I know one that we talked about during our final series, Brandon, was The Power of Negativity, how negative thoughts actually really persist a lot more in our mind and have more of a profound impact than positive ideas or effects. The effect of quiet leadership, introverted leadership is another interesting one that kind of fights the status quo of you have to be a rah-rah leader. So really looking at some of those communication aspects, leadership aspects has been a nice little rabbit hole for the past couple of times, and seeing how that could apply to me as as a leader. So no, I really appreciate you guys coming on. I think we really covered a lot more than we thought we would. So I apologize for keeping you guys for so long. But again, I love having you guys on, talking ball with you. And what we'll do is we'll make sure to throw in the description of this your guys' handles and stuff where they can kind of see you guys talking about baseball on Twitter, so on and so forth. But no, so I really appreciate what you guys had to say today, and we'll talk to you later.